Okay. Brilliant. So hi there. Okay, so we're hopefully all here. I think there's some others who I can't see on the full screen at this point in time. Hi, Francis. Welcome. Hi, Alex. Welcome. Okay, see Francis is still connecting her audio. Okay. So as I've said, if there's background noise, if you could keep your mics muted for me, that would be really helpful. We're recording this, so you will be able to view it again. It's also going to be available on YouTube. So again, if you want to revisit the recording, you can do so again. A huge delight in welcoming Shariff. Just by way of a little bit of background, I met Shariff on a call, I think the WBEX World Business and Executive Coaching Summit a few weeks ago, Shariff. And his presentation was really quite mind-blowing for me. Just to remind you that this is the 5th or 6th week I've been doing the Tuesday Tonic, and it really came about in the context of COVID. So my thinking was at the time, and the question I posed, I think, was who would have thought that at the beginning of the year, we would have an opportunity to pause, to reflect, and to reimagine a different world? Who would have thought that would be happening and possible for us? And it's in that context that I decided to set up the Tuesday Tonic as a space for people who are interested in the idea of revisiting, re-envisioning, reimagining the world to come together in discussion and conversations. So it was in that context I came across Shariff and his presentation. He's written an awesome book, which I've got here, Creating a World That Works for All. I haven't quite finished it yet, Shariff. And so I'm really delighted that he can be here. He'll tell you all about himself. I'm not going to steal his thunder. And I'm really just going to hand over now to Shariff, and we'll take it from there, if that's okay.
Okay with me. From my perspective, good morning. I think it might be dawn by now. And I'm just so thrilled to be awake in the morning. It's always interesting when we're talking about ourselves, our lives, our futures, our time together. And what I like to do is start with a quote that's from Creating a World That Works for All, if I can find it really quickly. And the quote is from the introduction. And the introduction was supplied by President Václav Havel when he was the president of the Czech Republic. He had invited me to Prague a couple of times to speak and to work with groups that he had put together. And I asked him to provide an introduction, and he did. So Havel says, humankind today is well aware of the spectrum of threats looming over its head. We know that the number of people living on our planet is growing at a soaring rate. We know that the already deep abyss separating the planet's poor and rich could deepen further. We also know that we've been destroying the environment on which our existence depends, and that we're headed for disaster by producing weapons of mass destruction and allowing them to proliferate. And yet, even though we're aware of these dangers, we do almost nothing to avert them. Well, this is a very literate way of saying that we're all stuck on stupid. We know the right thing to do. We keep doing the wrong thing. This is true in our societies at kind of like a global, transnational, governmental level. This is also true in our personal lives too. It's really hard for us to break our habits. And so what I would like us to do today is to have a discussion around what are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about What are the kinds of things that we need to be acting on? What are the kinds of things we need to be envisioning? Now that we have a situation where the entire world has hit the pause button, we have a situation where, for the first time in history, we've got something that is affecting or has the potential to affect all of us at the same time, regardless of what our circumstances are. Unless you are a multi-billionaire that owns their own island and can keep everybody away from you, etc. And if there are some folks on this call like that, raise your hand now. The big issue is, how do we affect and how are we affected in this COVID and post-COVID environment? Some years ago, and I don't know if Eldridge Cleaver was as famous in the UK as he was here, but back in the 1960s, Eldridge Cleaver wrote a book called Soul on Ice and was one of the co-founders of the Black Panther Party here. And I met him some years ago, actually 3 weeks before he died. And so this is the first and only time I met him. And I was telling him my plans for my organization, Commonway, and how those plans are involving societal transformation, how to change from the society that we've got to the society we deserve. So I'm talking for like maybe 10 or 15 minutes with him, and he's listening very intently. And when I stopped, he said, "Shariff, you're trying to change the tire on a moving car." He said, the tire needs to be changed, but the car won't stop. And so the question is now, 30 years later, because of COVID, the car stopped. We've stopped doing a lot of the things that we needed to stop doing. So as we restart our societies, as we restart our economies, what are the things that we need to restart? What are the things we need to continue? And what are the things that we really need to get rid of, that we really need to think about? Now, most of us are taught and trained to think about these things from the point of view of those people over there need to be doing the changing. Boris Johnson needs to change. Donald Trump needs to change. Both of them need to go to different barbers. And it's easy to point your finger at those billionaires over there. They're the ones causing the problem. Or the plastic manufacturers, they're the ones causing the problem. Or the oil companies and climate change, they're the ones causing the problem. But all of them, the Trumps and the Johnsons and the oil billionaires, etc., we all share the same consciousness. And so the question is, how do we change that consciousness? The question is, how do we start the process of shifting the society by shifting how we think about ourselves, how we think about each other, how we think about the systems and structures we've created and we support? How do we think about our relationship to our trans-sensory and even trans-dimensional realities? And so that's the kind of stuff I'd like for us to explore a bit today. I'll tell you something about myself. I can talk nonstop for probably 4 or 5 hours, and then I'll have to take a drink of water or something. But if you have any questions, I don't know that if there's two ways that you can get my attention enough to slow me down to ask a question. One of them is raising your digital hand. So down on the bottom of your screen, you should have a button that says participants. And if you push that button, it will give you an opportunity to raise a digital hand, and I'll see that on your screens. And I will slow down and get your question or comment. The other thing is, if you can't find that button, wave your meat hand around. We still got those, and actually I got two of them. And you can, I will then slow down and get your question or comment or thought or opinion or disagreement or whatever you want to put in here. So I've been doing this work of societal transformation for over 50 years. I first started doing work to change society when I was 11 years old. At 11 years old, I formed an organization called the Black People's Unity Movement. And this is in Camden, New Jersey. Camden, New Jersey is the worst city in America. We're number one. There are no bragging rights from being from the second or third worst city in America. So I'm perversely proud of the stomping grounds that I come from. And I lived in the worst parts of the worst city in America. Lived on public housing, lived on welfare, lived in a brutal environment, lived in, when National Public Radio went looking for the worst high school in America, they came to my alma mater. And in that environment, from that environment, I could see another world. That other world was being beamed to me by television. And everybody on TV was having a great time. I mean, they were having a ball. Ozzie and Harriet were having fun. And so from 8 or 9 years old, I'm thinking, why are we living in this world and these television people are living in this other world? And is it possible to bring these worlds together? So I was in a demonstration at 11 years old. And the other organizers of this organization, the Black People's Unity Movement. Oh, and it was the Black People's Unity Movement because all white people were having a ball. Okay, I could see that on TV. They're all having a ball. And so, so during the demonstration, we had a bullhorn. We were walking down the street. We're trying to get people to come out of their houses and join us. And someone handed me the bullhorn. Remember, I'm a very skinny 11-year-old. And I started talking into the bullhorn. And I don't know what I said. I don't remember what I said. I just remember the effect of it. People 3 blocks ahead of me were coming to their doors and listening. And when we got to their part of the march, they got in line. And it's that point that I realized the power of words, and I realized the power of groups. That when people amass around ideas, when people amass around words, there can be a very, very powerful effect. And that's the thing that has been keeping me going for half a century. It was in college that I realized that the world wasn't working for some white people. And it was through college and through grad school, through law school, that I began to see this larger picture where the world was not working even for the people it purported to work for. Because I went to a prestigious law school, because having a couple of degrees gives you the stamp of approval of society. And because I went from the circles of Camden, New Jersey to some very rarefied circles in and through my law practice, I began to see people who were the multimillionaires and the multi-billionaires who were deeply dissatisfied within themselves. The multimillionaires whose children were committing suicide or themselves were suicidal. The people who theoretically, from the peon's point of view, had everything, and realizing that having everything meant that they had nothing. And so the problem that we've got is a spiritual problem. Now, I'm very quick to add, by spiritual, I don't mean religious. I'm not here to wave a Bible or a Quran or a Bhagavad Gita or anything at you, okay? But to recognize that there's something that calls to all of our hearts. And whatever that thing is that's calling to us, in the kinds of societies that we've created, like, for example, in the United States, that call is being ignored. When we hear the spiritual call, we just turn up the volume on our 500 channel television sets and ignore it. Well, we've gotten to the point where the car stopped, and we've gotten to the point where we are thinking about what is the nature of the society we want to create. I'm suggesting to you that there is a way to think about this. Most of the time, most of us have a plan that we want the world to basically continue in a comfortable way for us, and we want to curb the excesses of the thems of the world, of the again, the Trumps or the Johnsons or the whoever's of the world. I'm suggesting something different. And what I'm suggesting to you is that what we want to curb, what we want to change, what we want to envision is us, is me. And we want to do that around the notion of creating a world that works for all. And my copy, Lorna, is a little bit more tattered than yours. It's been around for a little bit longer. And when people hear creating a world that works for all, they say, oh, that's a really good idea. And what they're hearing in their ears, and it goes through their neural network, is, I want the world to be a better place. And who doesn't want the world to be a better place? In fact, that's the most non-visionary thing that you can say. You walk outside your door and you see a cigarette butt and you pick it up and you put it in the proper receptacle, and you've made the world a better place. You do anything that you do, hug a child, drive safely down the road. You're making the world a better place, which means it's a non-goal, okay? So what I'm suggesting is, when you say I'm creating a world that works for all, it's like, how does the world work for that person I'm sharing the sidewalk with? How does the world work for the birds that are in that tree that I'm walking by? How does the world work for the tree itself? It changes your perspective. It changes your perspective to the point that you can start seeing your own behavior differently. How does the world work with more nuclear weapons in it? Well, I hope this isn't a shock for you, but it doesn't. We spend billions and billions and billions of dollars. It's a non obvious. You don't see people, pulling, nuclear weapons down your street or something like that. You never notice it. But our society spend billions of dollars on devices that can in no way make the world a better place. So why do we do it? Well, Havel just told us why we do it. We know what the problems are and we don't do anything to stop it. I'm making a suggestion that we actually stop that we stop the things that are keeping us from connecting with each other, connecting with all beings. And what I mean by all beings, all living beings, is not the environment. The environment is something that is an abstract concept. Saying I want to bring the carbon particulates down to 350 parts per million within the next 20 years is something that is an abstract concept. I can't see carbon in the atmosphere. As I'm driving down the street, I'm looking at everybody's tailpipes, and with only a few exceptions, I can't see anything coming out of it. Okay, and that's how we're killing ourselves. That's how we're killing each other. That's how we're killing the planet. Let me say one more thing, and then I'm going to actually pause and let your see if we can get either digital hands or meat hands working here. That that this goal of creating a world that works for all can become a worldwide rallying cry. That creating a world that works for all can be the thing that that drives all of humanity into another way of us connecting with each other. That can drive all of humanity into an elevated, I would say even a spiritually elevated position. And from that position, we can do things that are frankly from this position impossible, magical, but very, very necessary. I'll tell you one quick story, and then I'm going to pause and look for hands. So I've been from Camden, New Jersey. I've been around the world more times than I can count. I've been to 45 different countries. I've worked I'm guessing 120 different cultures. I've been to every continent that has people on it. And from this perspective, I've gained, when I talk about a world that works for all, I'm not talking about a world that just works for me and my friends. So I spent a lot of time in Sri Lanka trying to convince people that live in paradise to stop killing each other. I was there during the height of the war between the government and the Tamil Tigers. I was working with an organization called Sarvodaya, if you've got 2 or 3 hours, I'll be glad to tell you what we did to stop the war. But we put together a plan, and I said to the Sarvodia leadership, if we execute this plan, this war that's been going on for 30 years will stop in 2 to 5 years. That was my prediction. And they all thought I was insane, but they thought it was a good insanity. So let's try this. Let's do this. 18 months after we started, the government declared a ceasefire, unilateral ceasefire. And usually that's the opportunity for the Tamil Tigers to step up their operations. Or the Tamil Tigers would declare a unilateral ceasefire and the government would step up its operations. And so the government declared a 10-day ceasefire. And the Tamil Tigers, instead of stepping up their operations, said, we'll make it 20-day ceasefire. And the government came back, this is like they're playing poker or something, said, we're going to make it a 30-day ceasefire. And the Tigers came back and said, we'll make ours permanent. And the war just ground to a halt. Now, we're on the inside, knowing that all the things that we have been putting together on the ground put them in a position where they could not continue to execute the war. Our goal was not to talk to the leaders, but to knock the legs out from under the war. At the time the ceasefire was called, both the government and the Tamil Tigers had the highest number of desertions, of people deserting the army that they had ever had. And that was part of our doing. But we were suspicious. It was like, I remember us having our meetings and saying, is this it? Is this the peace that we were aiming for 6 months from now? Did it happen early? And we said, okay, look, we'll wait 6 weeks or so before we start declaring victory. And it worked. It was until they went back to it 6 years later. It was a very powerful experience. Being able to get in a vehicle and drive from Mathura to Jaffna, and without one side or the other shooting at you. For the first time, people who had been born on the island could actually travel to the entire island. Okay, that's, I just thought of 3 more stories, but I'm done here.
Excellent. I know, Shariff, that you've got so many stories to share, but you've also given us quite a lot of food for thought already. I mean, what was it? Trans-dimensional realities is something that struck me. I've not heard you speak about that. So I'd welcome hearing a little bit more about that. And also this notion of, I mean, I guess the story you've just shared about being in Sri Lanka is part of that. Starting the process of consciousness building, but also I think it'd be great to explore that a little bit more. But those are my questions or thoughts for you. Others, Marianne. Yeah, Marianne, if you unmute yourself. I've unmuted you. There you go.
Okay, so I understand completely, and I'm really not trying to be negative, but I'm trying to be realistic about this. If I think about humans and I think about how we are and who we are, we're animals. Whatever anybody says, we're animals at the end of the day. And we've got this issue as animals of this nature, nurture, look after your own versus the community. And, you know, this, where we come from and what we are, it's almost a bit like a contradiction for me in a sense, because in one way we are all caring for the community and we see the community in its broadest context as important. But on the other hand, as animals, our instinct is to look after our own, whatever our own means. So that the starting point of that is sort of an issue for me in terms of the contradiction that we are. But also, you know, the issue about how we encourage other people to be on board. I mean, the example that you gave about what happened when you, just the example of the case study just now, where you managed to stop something from happening. It was almost like it wasn't a conscious decision to stop those things from either side. It was almost like a tit for tat thing. So I suppose what I'm saying is, with that, are we understanding that we've got this contradiction of humans as we are, together with, by what means do we encourage people? Is it by consciously thinking, like you said, or is it a tit for tat thing? I'm not saying it's one or the other, but there's all these things, these complications of people that I see. And the concept of what you were talking about, you know, what your background and where you came from. I had a similar experience of, I lived in a rough area with lots of problems in my life from young, and I have worked my way through a system that understands how to get over those things as well. So there's that concept of that's a good thing to have. But I think all these things are going around in my head about all humans, how we behave, nature versus nurture, who we are. How do we bring people on board? Do we use different tactics? And is the tactic that we use a conscious effort? So that example you gave when you said you know, what happened there, that to me was like tit for tat. Oh, I'm gonna put a lockdown for 10 days. Well, I'm gonna do it for 20. So does that mean we do any means to be able to encourage people? Because that wasn't, to me, a conscious effort by those people. It was another thing that was going on. I'm really not trying to be negative. I'm really interested in this, but if you could maybe give some insight to what I've just said.
Yeah, don't think of it as negative, Marianne. This is a space for, as you say, exploring and discussing. Shariff, how do you want to take it? Do you want to do one at a time, or do you want others to come in? I see Frances has unmuted herself. So Frances, did you want to ask something?
Oh God, there's so much that has
I just wanted to say that what Marianne said will take 2 hours for me to unpack. So Frances, let's pile on, okay?
Okay. So we'll take a few and then let's see how we get on. So Frances, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I am sort of bowled over that a lot has been said, and I'm thinking, you know, what you did with the Tamil Tigers, can you do elsewhere in the world? There's lots of freedom fighters and causes going on. I don't know. I think it was conscious. I don't think people are. They must. I mean, it was sort of almost like they were trying to. Well, I can do better. I can do better, and they came to sort of some arrangement between themselves in their minds about how much they would give and take. And if they kind of edge towards each other a little bit more as trust. I don't know. I wasn't there, but it is interesting to perhaps not now learn how that did happen, because there are other conflicts in the world that might learn from whatever you did with whoever you did it with.
So if I'm hearing you, Frances, is it something about are these acting on the world, are they repeatable? Can they be applied elsewhere?
Are they repeatable? And why hasn't anyone else done it then? And you know, how did you get the people who are in power there to even let you do it? And how did it affect the rest of the world? Because anything that America is tied up with usually will have a huge influence on what people can and can't do. And that's not being negative about America. I mean, that's just as I see it, as I experience across conflicts and power bases across the world. So
we learn from all of this, I think, is a big, because if the goal is, or if the objective or the mission is creating a world that works for all, which is what I think, Shariff, you were saying, can that be a rallying cry for all of us? Then how do those, and again, not to sound negative, but how do those kind of small pockets or those individual experiences or those specific case study examples give us ways forward, and how are we learning those? So that's something I think that's really helpful. Martin, Steve, anyone else want to kind of jump in at this point? So Steve, if you unmute yourself, and Martin, if you unmute yourself, and then we'll come back to you, Shariff, after Steve and Martin. So Steve. Yeah.
Right. Hi, Shariff. I too have read your book with great interest. And it resonated with me in many, many respects. So the work I do is mainly ontological coaching, and work with teams and dealing with conflict, trying to identify where the differences are and where the similarities are, to try and tease out usually what is it that the team really cares about. And usually when I ask that question, it tends to start off with day-to-day concerns about, I don't get resources for this, I don't get resources for that. But as one digs a bit deeper, we begin to get to the human issues. I get concerned when people talk to me like that. People let me down. And gradually the conversation moves towards what is it that they really care about in terms of benefits for each other and benefits for themselves. And usually that builds some kind of common ground. And I'd be interested to know, in your practices and the processes that you used in, for example, Sri Lanka, which sounds a fantastic achievement, give me an inkling of some of the processes and practices that you felt worked in achieving that objective.
Brilliant, thanks, Steve. And Martin.
Hi everyone, and hi Shariff. Thanks for that really fascinating introductory summation there. And like everyone else, yeah, a lot to think about. I guess the one thing I was picking up on, and I guess very similar to Marianne, I guess to me, this sounds like, to put it in terms that I can understand, this sounds a lot like a form of sort of cosmopolitanism. If correct me if I'm wrong, just that notion of the sort of the society of one world, if you will, a kind of that we all have some sort of ethical obligations to everyone, irrespective of their background or beliefs or whatever. And that's something that I think's a noble idea and something I subscribe to personally. I think, but as I have that belief, I think I understand the challenges of cosmopolitanism, and the biggest challenge, I think, is the kind of the universalist assumption behind it, that ultimately we are all the same in the sense that we all want the same things, really. And I think that there's a sort of a broad sense that is true. We do want all the same things, but there is a specific sense in which I begin to wonder that is not true and never will be true and never was true. And if that's the case, then the common society or the betterment of lives for all becomes problematic, because the definition of better, the definition of society, and the definition of all can't be agreed upon. I know Steve is probably going to say, "Oh, that's that same guy that was moaning last week or the week before," but you know, yeah, I'm sorry, I am kind of banging on that same drum, because I do think that our times that we're living in right now, be it Trump and Johnson or Bolsonaro, as a friend of Brazil was telling me about, or even Corbyn and and others, I think all of these represents there's a granularity there, I think, in terms of human desire, that there's a problem with accommodating contradictory ambitions in one society, however one chooses to say that. And consequently, I think this is why we're in the midst of what is, I think, is very really a culture war. We're fighting on these definitions. We're fighting on these, what in terms of where we want to go as a race. And so I guess I'm trying to, you know, where's the question here? I guess I'm asking, do you have a solution to that? Are you suggesting that despite the apparent differences in our wants and desires, that universalism is still the fundamental truth, and it will ultimately be what allows us to come to some sort of, you know, global, let me put it in the term, global, an uplifting of global consciousness? Because it seems to me that's what we're talking about. We're talking about uplifting global consciousness. And to do that, it's got to be an idea that absolutely everyone, regardless of class or gender or sexuality or, you know, education, whatever, everyone can tap into and feel as passionately about as they do about country or religion or whatever else we sort of unite around. It seems to be such an idea would have to have that kind of place. And do you think that there's that potential to do that with humans as we find them? Sorry if that was rambling. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Martin. No pressure there then, Shariff, for you to respond to some really complex.
Yeah, really sorry about that question. It was a bit long.
Number one, please don't any of you apologize for asking what I think are brilliant questions. I don't get brilliance a lot, okay? And so I just wanted to pause for a second before I launch in and acknowledge each of you and recognize that I definitely want the recording for this, because I think that these questions are very, I hate saying this, but much more powerful than the ones I get on this side of the Atlantic Ocean. I'm going to I'm going to answer each of the questions slightly obliquely. The first is that in 15 minutes, I can't do justice to even one of the questions. I can't do justice to one part of Marianne's 5-part question, okay? So I'm just going to give you a very broad brush, and maybe I'll come back at some other time. So first thing is, get your copy of Creating a World That Works for All and read it. Second thing is, get your copy of Practicing Inclusivity and practice it. This is a workbook for you to practice how to see yourself in relationship to other. And looking at yourself. The first chapter is practicing inclusivity with yourself, which many of us don't do. As you were asking the questions, I was jotting some notes, and I'm glad I did that, because I can now go back to Marianne and say a few things. You mentioned the word realistic several times, and what is realistic, what is doable, is simply a function of your consciousness. Now, you can change that consciousness and therefore see the world a completely different way. I think it was the Buddha who said that he may have said it in the positive or the negative, but basically the eyes see what the mind is prepared to accept. If the mind isn't prepared to accept something, you can't see it. Erich Honecker, the last president of East Germany, said that the Berlin Wall would last another 100 years. And at the time he made that statement, the Berlin Wall didn't last another 100 hours. That's how quickly things can change. When we talk about things like, we're animals and we have instincts, etc., I'm prepared to see the competition between animals, the competition between a lion and a gazelle. But we also can see, if we choose to, an entire world of cooperation where my exhaling and the tree inhaling is a dance of mutuality. We wouldn't be here unless there was massive cooperation, unless there was cooperation of the tens of thousands of beings that are in your gut right now, chewing away at breakfast, or in your case, lunch, or maybe even dinner, and keeping you alive. There's a very specific being that lives inside your eyeball, not on the surface of your eye. And the only thing this being does is eat the fat deposits on your eye so that you can see. If it wasn't there, the fat would clog your eyes, and as a baby, you'd never learn how to see. So we are symbiotic with each other. We're symbiotic with all of the other aspects of nature. And we live in a society where our consciousness is geared toward us being separate. One of the things that we did in Sri Lanka was one of the first things that we did, and this gets a bit to Martin's point, was make a list of all of the people who supported peace, who wanted the war to end. And then we made another list, and this list was a lot longer, of the people who didn't want it to end, the people who they believed made profits from the war, the people they believed had a philosophical stake in the war. And once we realized that the combating parties were not the Sinhalese and the Tamils. The combating parties had 20 or 30 different heads and different things that they brought to the table, etc. So every time you see a conflict, and this gets to Francis's point, I make that same list. When I get invited into an organization that is having some issues of inclusivity, of not having enough inclusivity, first thing I do is, who wants us coming together and who doesn't want that to happen? And once you see that list, you get to see the challenge clearer. And once you see that list, you get to see the solutions clearer. In order for us to do the work, and again, I'm just using Sri Lanka. I've done this in lots of different places. I'm just using Sri Lanka as an example because that's the one I thought about this morning. I don't get involved in conflicts that the United States is involved in because they don't know how to conflict. They don't, actually, I'm not going to go there because that could take up 2 hours just explaining that. But I go where I'm invited, and so therefore the question is, who wants the conflict to end? There are lots of people who want the conflict to continue. They don't want the conflict to end. That's on the list of people who are against peace. There are lots of people who they don't want the conflict to end. They want to win. And these are also the people that don't want peace for a different set of reasons. To get to part of Steve's point, talking about the benefits of having a focus that says we are creating a world that works for all. When I'm invited into a conflict area, I need to carry a magnet. What is the thing that will draw people together that will draw people away from their conflict. For example, I was working in some small communities here. I'm in Portland, Oregon right now. Arguably the best city in America. I moved up in the world. In the agricultural valleys that surround Portland, Oregon, there have been conflicts between the long-term Anglo population, the children of the pioneers that came through and settled the area, settling meaning colonization, oppression, and domination. And the Latino populations that are there working in the fields. So I got called in to help resolve some of the conflicts between these two groups of people. The challenge that we face, and one of the things that works well for me is that it's very clear that I am not an Anglo and I'm not a Latino. I was not Sinhalese, I'm not Tamil. My otherness acts, and the otherness of my group acts as a benefit. Like, I don't have anything at stake here. I can tell you what my agenda is relatively quickly, because I don't have a lot at stake. And once we can identify that the goal is creating a community that works for all, not creating a community where those Latinos stay in their place, or creating a community where the Latinos have rights too. Once we create a state that's creating a world that works for all, I had to find the magnet. And the magnet in this case was some of the Rockefeller Foundation's money. I go into the community and I have a bag of money. It's like $20,000 in a small community. And I put it on the table and I say, it's yours. The only thing you've got to do is agree on how to spend it. And I got only 2 or 3 guidelines. It doesn't go to one individual. I'm the one that determines whether you've agreed or not you. And over a 3-year process, these communities came together not because they like each other, not because I've helped them to see the beauty of each other's communities, etc. It's that, oh, I want that $20,000, or I want to at least tell how that money gets spent. The process, and again, if you got a couple of hours, I'll be glad to tell you about that process too. That process was such that when we got to the point that the community started coming together, the $20,000 was irrelevant. We were having these great meetings. I mean, these meetings were like love fest. Everybody's agreeing with each other. Everybody's looking to the future of their community. At the end of the meeting, I'd say, well, this is great, but you still haven't made a plan for how to spend the $20,000. And they're saying, oh, it doesn't matter anymore. Look, we're a community. So in the Sri Lanka situation, we created what we called the 500-year peace plan. The war wasn't created in 500 years. The war wasn't just the product of the Sinhalese and the Tamils. The war was created over 500 years of colonialism, of oppression, of them not knowing how to govern themselves, having their governing institutions wiped away from them. It's going to take that long to bring it back. And most of the breaker governments, and for the 2 of you that have the book, you know what I mean by breakers. And for the other ones that don't have the book, get the book and you'll find out what I'm talking about in terms of the consciousness of breakers. You'll see a situation where the thinking is, what's good for me right now? What's good for my power position? What's good for me making more money? But the reality is something different, okay? the reality is, once I get people to start thinking about their children and their grandchildren, they get a whole different way of seeing the world. And that's where they start coming together into a world that works for all beings. So, okay, I have another hour's worth of responses here. Oh, let me say one more thing regarding what Marianne was saying. In a river, if there's a frozen stream, the ice melts from the bottom. A lot of times on the surface, you can't see things happening. On the surface, the war looked like it was getting worse and worse. On the surface, the Anglo leaders and the Latino leaders were not seeing eye to eye. But all that richness and warmth was happening at the bottom. And when it broke up, when the Berlin Wall falls, it's spectacular. But that fall had been in place, had been moving in that direction, regardless of what was happening at the level of the leaders. The leaders couldn't predict it. Our Central Intelligence Agency, wasting trillions of dollars, never saw it coming. They never see anything coming. Just like that, the changes that we're being called toward now are at that level. And if I could just read a quote from Creating a World That Works for All, and then I'll shut up. This is a quote by a Brazilian theologian by the name of Rubem Alves. And he did two quotes. And it's hard for me to decide which one. I just flipped to this one. Let us learn from those who plant date trees. A date tree takes 80 years from the time it is planted to bear its first fruit. To plant a date tree is an act of faith, a sign of hope, and a symbol of one's loving commitment to the future. Let us plant dates, even though we who plant them will never eat them. We must live by the love of what we will never see. This is the secret discipline. It is the refusal to let our creative act be dissolved away in immediate sense experience, and is a stubborn commitment to the future of our grandchildren. Such disciplined love, and I'm going to say that again, such disciplined love is what has given prophets, revolutionaries, and saints the courage to die for the future they envision. They make their own bodies the seed of their highest hopes. And that's all we are, is seeds. And that's all that we can hope to be. The best seed, the clearest seed, and the clearest line between myself and the future for humanity.
Thank you. Wow, very powerful. I'm going to ask everyone to unmute for a moment, because that was quite powerful, that last quote. And I'm just going to ask each of you to, or whether we can ask Shariff again, because one of the things I think, knowing the audience, knowing Marion, for example, and Polly and Delroy, who seems to have disappeared now, are some of the practical things. I mean, I heard what you said, Shariff, about being the seed and seeing ourselves as seed. Polly, I know you've got to go, but so thank you for coming. But I was going to try and kind of pick up on your question about leadership and invite Shariff to just reflect on that from your perspective, because you work in an organization where leadership is the focus. Equally, Marion, I wanted to just kind of invite some reflection on what does what you've heard today mean for how you take forward and apply in the way you work with the communities and the organizations you need to be engaged with, whether there's been some useful points or not, because I think at the level of the practicality, it's really important to also understand what does this suggest for you and for Delroy and for Polly, who's unfortunately had to go, for how, you know, the lessons that Shariff has shared today that you can take forward. So I don't know whether you want to quickly jump in there, Marion, and say what for you has been useful.
I think it's been useful. It's just trying to translate. It's trying to translate the concepts. I do understand there's commonality with what, especially when you said if people can think out of the box and think about what the commonality is, people for the future, for their children or their grandchildren, even if they haven't got children, but for the future of humanity. I think there is a commonality, whether it's the gut instinct of looking after your own because you're looking after your own children or your grandchildren, or whether it's the commonality of humans. I can see there's an opportunity there to reach that out to any environment. The trick is sussing out what hits people's buttons, really, in the context of whatever you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks, Marion. And Martin and Stephen, Francis as well. I'm just gonna, and I know Eddie and Hannah too, and Alex are around as well. So Martin, I don't know whether you want to just kind of again reflect on, you raised questions about universalism and cosmopolitanism, big words that I'm struggling to say, some of what you've heard from Shariff has kind of picked up on those from your perspective.
Thank you very much, Shariff, for your time on this. It's been really, really interesting and given me a lot to think about beyond this discussion. One thing that I really picked up on was the strategy, the tactic that you employed of, you know, the $20,000 as a unifying. Well, I guess it was a mechanism through which to get people to sort of cooperate and to find their commonality, to find their sense of community around. Essentially, it was like we all want this thing, so it appealed to the fact that everybody, out of just appealing to everyone's self-interest, would want to have this money come to their community. So it was in all of their interests to work together to get this common goal. I guess to be a stickler, I'm going back to what is that common goal when you're talking about sort of global consciousness and global, you know, I mean, to put it in context to something that, you know, I know familiar from. I'm a filmmaker. I work on film sets, and I know that the insane difficulty of getting a crew of 200 people working towards one creative vision it's so difficult that essentially, you know, you have to employ, you know, this is where you have sort of these directors who end up being like tyrants, or you know, you have people being taken advantage of, whatever. All of that because managing all of these different you know, everyone's got their own perspective, and it's because they can't agree on the creative vision. Ultimately, is that there isn't that thing that unifies everybody. And I guess I'd say I heard somewhere recently, and I thought it was brilliant, but behind every cynic is a disappointed idealist. And I guess I'm a disappointed idealist, you know, and I'm trying to find what is the ideal that could possibly do what you did in Portland. What is the ideal that could do that for, you know, our societies too? Because I think as humans, I think it's really easy for us to unite when we see that, when it's our neighbor, when you see them, you know, and you could talk to them on a daily basis, and you share the same roads, whatever else. But when it gets much more abstract, when it's the air, you know, or it's your obligation to the grandchildren that you don't even know yet, I think that's when we as humans get a bit fuzzy. And I guess that's the thing that I think about a lot personally, you know, having kids and having that particular sort of attraction to, you know, sort of internationalist, you know, progressive sort of ideas. I guess that's the thing that I kind of go, ooh, I'm not sure there's that $20,000 equivalent on the global consciousness, but I really would, that's a really interesting, just as a strategy, I thought that was really interesting, and I'd see if I can try and employ that in my smaller areas of like my work. I think that'd be a really good way of trying to find commonality. But, yeah.
Can I actually say something really quick? I promise to be really quick. I didn't want to leave your point, Martin, in terms of the one world or cosmopolitan concept. I'm a believer in a common set of human values. I am not a believer in one world government. I think that would be an amazingly bad idea. Okay. The only, I can't imagine it not being authoritarian and therefore the opposite of what we should be heading for.
Sorry, can I come back as well? Not to make this too long, but that's not what cosmopolitanism is. Sorry, it's simply it's a citizen of the world, to say that you know that national boundaries aren't where our ethical obligations end. That's what.
Well, I agree with number one. I agree with that, but I also agree with that from the point of view of the rice farmers in Indonesia that I have tea with, whose entire world is their village. They may in their entire life never leave their village. I was, okay. Back to you, Lorna.
Okay, so what I was going to suggest, because I think Martin's question also for me connected to Steve's point about teams and creating a shared sense of whatever it is, a vision, or what is it that we care about? What does this team care about? And getting to that is the challenge quite often, is what I'm hearing. And I think, Martin, you're talking about it from a, you know, sort of from your industry point of view. But I think that's where the commonality is what I'm hearing, Shariff, is between Steve and Martin's kind of big question is, how do you arrive at the shared sense of what does this world that works for all, how do we get to a shared understanding of that? But obviously we're not going to be able to ask that question. But Steve, did you want to to reflect on anything else from here?
Yeah, just one point, if I may. It was I think the point that Shariff was making about the importance of neutrality in the process of bringing people together and dealing with conflict. And it just strikes me that in working with teams, as you say, and trying to sort of work this through to where you've got a sort of boundary on what you're trying to achieve. So you've got some focus to it. But that boundary tends to come with common features about it that affect the whole organization and therefore link into the culture. But my point was really about the impact, therefore, what it means for leadership, because it seems to me effective leadership in that situation is someone who takes that neutral position, who doesn't have a clear view in their own mind about what they want to happen. They've got a sense of what would be a sense of beneficial to humanity, beneficial to the organization's survival, or benefit to the education and learning of the people in the organization. I can stand all these issues about learning, organization, everything else, but it comes for me down to this point about getting commitments, and trying to get commitments from people is in a sense an easy bit. We can agree that you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to do the other. The issue is how we share in the creation of those commitments. Because if we're not creating those commitments together, we're going to lead to conflict in the end process, because people are then going to argue about the fact, well, I didn't mean that, and that was not what I was trying to do, and you let me down here. If we participate in the creation of the commitments, then at least we generate a future that we've all invested in. That was my thinking.
Okay. And before Shariff, you step in, Francis, any final reflections? Because I'm going to ask Shariff to sort of share his final thoughts and wrap things up. Unless Eddie, Hannatu, or Alex, you've got anything you want to say. If I see your mics on mute, then I'll know you want to say something.
I'd like just to come in, but just to say really that what I would like to say, there is no time whatsoever, but just to say that on a, no way, but on a micro level, it's easier to work and look at yourself and look at others, and maybe even move into someone else's micro in a nearby space. But I think when you're looking at the macro, there's a lot more difficulty there, because there will be some people, however neutral you are, will never think you're neutral if you're going in there to try and change something. And another thing I'd throw out is superpowers, how many, you know, how much power have we really got? Because how, you know, are there sort of about 3 power levels in the whole world, or more? I don't think it's as easy. I think there's probably stuff we don't even understand. Not to say we shouldn't try and fight it, but I think there are bigger things, bigger power levels that have got allegiances just to themselves. And there are some places where you would not be welcome to go in and try and change something, because you would be against your own country. I won't go say anymore, but a conflict close to my heart, really, that no one would be welcome to try and especially you as an American. But anyway, I'll say no more.
Francis, thanks. So Shariff, I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, because I'm conscious of everyone's time and you've all kind of been and stayed with us, even though we've gone a little over time. If you could kind of pull together your reflections and notice. The one thing to say, Polly has gone, but she also asked, could we also think about what does this mean for leadership? And I think Steve kind of touched on that earlier. So I don't know whether in your wrapping up, Shariff, you could just share your reflections on that as well.
So in each of the conflicts that I've talked about, either here between the Anglos and the Latinos, or in Sri Lanka, between the Sinhalese and the Tamils, or between the government and the Tamil Tigers, there's always a leadership level that has a stake in the maintenance of the conflict. The work that I do is at this level, to take the power away from these folks here that never get out there with guns and shoot at each other. They always convince someone else to do that. And this work is not sexy at all. It doesn't make the headlines in the New York Times. So when the New York Times was analyzing back in 2001 why the war in Sri Lanka came to a screeching halt, they never mentioned Sarvodaya. They couldn't see Sarvodaya. All they're looking at is, well, this leader wanted this and that leader wanted that, and all these people are affected by all the people here. So working at the level of human beings very quickly can see where their common interests are. Human beings respond to that message, and they have to be told by their leaders to go back to the conflict. This actually happened in the tsunami that affected Sri Lanka. During the tsunami, the government soldiers and the Tamil Tigers put down their weapons at the local level and cooperated with each other. There was so much cooperation going on that their leaders had to go and say, no, don't do this. You have to go back and start shooting each other. So my goal, our goal, is to develop a whole new kind of leadership. And if I can end by reading the second quote from Ruben Alves that I just happened to find in the book. He says, what is hope? It is the presentiment that imagination is more real and reality is less real than it looks. It is the hunch that the overwhelming brutality of facts that oppress and repress are not the last word. It is the suspicion that reality is more complex than realism wants us to believe, that the frontiers of the possible are not determined by the limits of the actual, and that in a miraculous and unexpected way, life is preparing the creative events which will open the way to freedom and resurrection. Well, as a theologian, he's talking about a different kind of resurrection. But I believe that we, all of us, are working toward the resurrection of the human spirit on this planet in a vastly different way than it has been. I'm comfortable, I'm confident that we are experiencing the leading edge of that resurrection right now. That we're going to be a different kind of leader than the Borises or the Donalds or anybody else in this in our society. How we exercise that will come forward in miraculous ways. Some of us will be dancing on top of walls. Some of us will be digging gardens. Others of us will be organizing human beings in a really different way. I'm comfortable and I'm confident that together, wherever we are, we will take these steps. And that in the back of your mind, that phrase, creating a world that works for all, will be operating and will be the warmth that's melting the ice at the top. And on our journey, I wish us all well. So thank you for listening to me. And thank you for some very inspiring questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So blessings to you, Shariff. Thank you very much. And thank you guys, as always, for coming along and for your great questions. The video, I will put it somewhere so that you can see the recording if you want to do that. And perhaps, Shariff, you might come back again another time and continue some of the conversations. I think that would be really wonderful. So huge thank you to Shariff, and thank you to everyone, as always, for coming and spending this time with us, with me, with each other, and see you again soon. Okay. Have a great week. Take care. Bye, everybody. Bye. Bye. See you soon. Bye. Take care. Bye. 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 See you soon.
Bye.
Okay. Bye. 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 Take care. Bye-bye. Bye. See you soon, Francis.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye. See you soon. Take care. Okay. Bye.